Welcome to the Work Positive Podcast with your host, executive coach, and culture architect, Dr. Joey Fawcett. Discover strategies and tactics that work positive as Dr. Joey talks with industry leaders who create a positive work culture that attracts top talent and reduces team turnover. Discover how you can create a work positive culture that increases productivity and profits. Here's your host, Dr. Joey.
Work Positive Nation, man, I learned so much over this first season. Amazing guests just really took us to a better understanding of what's going on in creating a positive work culture around the world, and specifically how to create a more positive work culture. So in this episode, what I'm doing is to talk about 6 hot topics or 6 hot trends that I noted. Now, what I'd love for you, if you're watching this in YouTube or listening to this from YouTube or some other conversational place, please go in and comment on these. Talk about which of these 6 you really enjoyed the most, which one you learned the most from, which one you think's the hottest of the hot topics, right? And then we can create our dialogue and just keep Work Positive Nation growing and moving forward, all right? So number 1, the first one that I noted is work culture finally gets its day in the sun. Work culture finally gets its day in the sun. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that work culture has kind of been regarded by so many people, particularly C-suiters, as squishy and woo-woo and that kind of stuff that we sort of shelve off to the side, right? But work culture is actually extending its influence and literally getting its day in the sun. It's rising up into a place where it's getting more and more light. In fact, as my friend Larry Levine, who wrote Selling from the Heart, likes to say, soft skills drive hard dollars. Now, Larry is a specialist in the sales world, right? Selling from the Heart. Check out Selling from the Heart. It's a great book. You'll really enjoy it a lot if you are selling anything at all or even interested in sales. So creating a sales culture is what Larry's talking about, but every other type of culture as well. Marisa Andrada, she and I had an amazing conversation just recently about culture and things like that, and she really covered a breadth of topics. So please check out that episode that just aired a week or so ago. Sales, operations, management, frontline, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, culture is finally getting its day in the sun. And I think that's something to celebrate. So that's the first hot topic that we heard about over the last year. What about you? Do you think work culture is finally getting its day in the sun? Okay, now I know we've got a long ways to go, right? We want to continue to elevate. However, at least now, they're letting us out and we're getting into the forefront of conversations. Now, why is this? Because I think the overall realization is, I believe, culture equals ROI. We've begun to turn the corner. I don't think we're all the way around the corner yet, but we've begun to turn the corner on an understanding cognitively and an emotive commitment to the fact that human beings are the ones doing the work. And that human beings, they require a conversation and just something different to collaborate with, rather than an assembly line mentality and regarding people as disposable commodities, right? We're putting the human back in human resources. And that's something to celebrate. So that's my first hot topic that I noticed over the last year or so. So that's an amazing one. Again, comment on that. Send me an email at drjoey@workpositive.today, and we can have a conversation about that. The second hot topic or trend that I noted that's likened to the first is that HR is elevating. HR is elevating from support to superstar status. From support to superstar status. And what do I mean by that? So often it seems that human resources has been relegated to a point of almost like the law enforcement in a company, right? In that support role, they're form jockeys and they're policy cops. You got to make sure we're meeting all the government requirements. You got to make sure everybody filled out the forms. That's pretty much been it up until just recently. One of the amazing things come out of the pandemic, I believe, amazingly positive things come out of the pandemic, is that we, again, as I said a moment ago, began to shift towards an understanding and putting the human back in human resources. That means that HR is elevating from simply a support staff, which is important. I mean, we need those kinds of things paid attention to. We need to make sure that the forms are completed. We need to make sure we follow policy. However, there's so much more that human resources can give in terms of influence and leadership in the areas of productivity, in the areas of engagement, the kinds of things that have really been lagging prior to the pandemic, but came to our attention during the pandemic, right? And we really focused a light on that, particularly around the issue of productivity. And we'll talk about that trend in just a moment. But going from support to superstar status, I believe, is really, really important in this greater place of support. I liken it to a classic dance couple, right? I love to dance, as you know. I've got the trophies to prove it. Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, back in the days of black and white TV. Go on YouTube and check them out. They moved with grace and, I mean, just in sync with each other. Now, so often people, and maybe because it was a more patriarchal focused society at that point, people really focused on Fred Astaire, right? If you watch Ginger Rogers in all of those videos, Ginger Rogers is doing everything that Fred Astaire is doing, with two notable exceptions. She's doing it all backwards because she's doing the opposite of what he's doing. So she's doing it all backwards. And secondly, she's doing it all in high heels. So I think she was the better performer of the two. And yet he, for so long, got the press. My point being this: human resources has been the Ginger Rogers of the corporate dance for so long. So it's time to move away from the front-facing Fred Astaire emphasis to understanding Ginger Rogers did it all backwards and in high heels, and that's what human resources have been doing for so long, right? They've been making sure we followed policy, they've been making sure we filled out the forms, and now, wow, they're elevating from support to superstar status, because now we understand the importance of putting the human back in human resources and the degree of difficulty that it takes to deal with human beings, right? Not just in some sort of broad stroke way, but in very specific ways that engage them more and increase productivity and the kinds of things that we're seeing that must happen today, particularly in this weird talent market we're in. So human resources is elevating its status to superstar status because it's human resources that attracts top talent. It's human resources that reduces team turnover, right? It's human resources that connects people and profits. So human resources is elevating from support to superstar status. And so they're moving from relative obscurity as Ginger Rogers to more of a Fred Astaire approach. Man, I love that. So that's the second topic. HR is elevating from support to superstar status. The third one, and man, this one's interesting. Totally interesting. And one that's capturing news headlines even as I'm recording this. We have yet to determine how much physical proximity we need to work best, how, and when. Yeah. I interviewed Peter Capelli, Kevin Eikenberry, Gustavo Rossetti just a couple weeks ago, Bob Johansson early on in the season. By the way, all four of these gentlemen have written amazing books, just amazing books. The Long Distance Team is Kevin Eikenberry's. Peters takes this on specifically. He's a distinguished professor at the Wharton School of Business. Gustavo Rossetti is Remote, Not Distant, which I absolutely love that title. If you need to read all of these, but Bob Johansson's Office Shock, start with that one, because that one's going to play with your head the most. It's literally going to rearrange the way you think about, or I like to say it's going to aid you in the redefinition of work, which is part of what's going on in the midst of this and part of what we discovered in season 1, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Office Shock really takes on that notion of where people work best and when and how. Bob is a futurist, so just remember that as you read Office Shock. He's also highly approachable. He's also one of my course creator partners in the Small Hinges Swing Big Doors course, which is out now, and we'll talk more about that in just a few minutes. I know in the news, the CEO of Amazon just announced that, the people who think they're going to work remote full time, probably not going to have a job at Amazon much longer. We know what Elon Musk has done with Twitter, formerly Twitter, now X, requiring people to come into work. We're seeing that more and more. We're seeing people coming back and being told they've got to come in 2 or 3 days a week. So there's almost this hybrid work environment that's being created in terms of physical proximity, which basically keeps people off stride 50% of the time and people unhappy, at least half the people unhappy all the time, right? So how we work best in physical proximity and when is a real challenge. Again, that's why Dr. Bob's book, Dr. Bob Johansson's book, Office Shock, is such a seminal work, I think, in helping us understand this. By the way, he's helping Walmart even now design their new corporate campus in Northwest Arkansas. Office Shock is informing that. So you might want to check that out as well and just see the cool kinds of things that Walmart's doing. Looking out 10 years and then forecasting and coming back to today and determining next best actions. Certainly, we saw early on during the pandemic that productivity tended to soar in some instances. The average American, for instance, drives about 2 hours to work or commutes 2 hours to work daily. That's 5 days a week. That's 10 hours a week. And so we saw initial productivity, even out of Australia. We saw studies come, just Google it and you'll find them for yourself. Studies showing productivity increased as the pandemic heightened. And we were all trying to figure out what it meant to work from home. Now, the interesting thing is, as I'm recording this, there seems to be some murmurings of COVID coming back around. I certainly have had some friends who texted or emailed or called and said, hey, I just had COVID for the second time or something like that. So we're not exactly sure. And in fact, when you're listening to this recap of season 1 of the Work Positive podcast, who knows what the status is right then. We do know that the physical proximity in which we work together is changing. And we saw that person after person after person. It came up in just about every episode of the Work Positive podcast in season 1. However, we don't know exactly how that's going to work out. Human Resources has an amazing opportunity here to, again, put the human in human resources and speak into this new reality. The office verse, as Dr. Bob likes to call it, is changing, and yet there is some work that currently we do better together. There have been some studies that suggested, and we talked about this year, innovation and creativity tend to be higher in times of physical proximity. We know that as human beings, we herd quite well, we team best, and so there is a generativity that Zoom just can't quite capture. However, to Dr. Bob's point, there's more and more augmented intelligence, augmented reality that's coming that will allow us to have more physical proximity-like experiences. So what does that look like? How will that function? We don't know. Read his book. He can tell you where those trends are headed. What we do know is that over the last year, we're struggling to figure out physical proximity, and it's creating a lot of angst even now. So that's the third hot topic or trend that I noted. Let me move on to the fourth, and I'm really excited about this one. I'm really excited about all of them. You asked me to choose from these 6. It's like choosing between my daughters, right? My granddaughter wins all hands down all the time, though. The fourth one I absolutely love because it's been a long time coming. And Human Resources has led the way. Creating a positive work culture now has this trend or topic as a stack pole, really. And that is, we're having more and better mental health conversations. Yeah, we are, aren't we? We're having more and better mental health conversations. And I absolutely love this. In season 2 of the Work Positive podcast, you're going to have an opportunity to hear my conversation with Greg Kettner from Work Happy. And in that, we talk a lot about mental health conversations. However, over season 1, we heard it often as an underlying trend, more spoken and talked about at some times than others. But that is more and better mental health conversations are occurring. Part of the reason for that is that during the pandemic, we specifically saw anti-anxiety and antidepressant prescriptions that are written for medications rise. 30% is about the average figure I saw. Some indicated higher, some less, but most of the less is not much less. It'd be like 27%, but I actually saw some numbers approaching 40%. That's a huge uptake, if you will, in anti-anxiety and antidepressant prescriptions being written. That really forced the issue to have more and better mental health conversations. Loneliness became more of a topic, and we'll talk more about a couple of hot topics and trends in just a moment that I saw that I think are the antidote to some of the antidotes to some of the things that we experienced in our season 1 conversations about mental health. But it's now becoming more and more accepted, even respected, and in some circles expected for questions to be asked that may have been taboo previously. Questions like, hey, you seem a little off today. Are you okay? We're hearing that more and more. In fact, that question, how are you? Are you okay? Something on your mind, is really becoming more and more of an expected question because of the increase in the suicide rate over the pandemic. So we go look at those numbers, particularly among teens. Suicide is now the leading cause of death among teenagers. What does that have to do with work culture, you say? Well, teens are in the workforce. They are mostly in frontline positions, but they're working summer jobs, they're working after school jobs and things like that. So it's becoming more, and then their parents, right, are in the workforce. Other questions, or just maybe we can say the permission. Let's say the permission to make statements like, I'm stressed, I'm burned out, I'm feeling down, I'm feeling depressed. And then the flip side of this mental health conversations is statements like, hey, can we reschedule that meeting for a different time? I know that time fits you, but that's when I walk. I walk at 7 o'clock in the morning, so I'd like not to have a meeting then if we could. Or I'm meditating at that time, or something like that. So it's becoming more and more accepted, because we're having more and better mental health conversations, right? To care for oneself. Again, recognizing that we're putting the human back in human resources as part of the positive work culture. So we have to celebrate that. We have to be excited about that, I think, because we are people, and it's more and better. People become more and better, then it's absolutely an amazing thing. Productivity goes up, engagement goes up, motivation, which is an inside job anyway, becomes more activated. So we just see more goodness happening, all of which contributes, again, as Larry Levine says from Selling from the Heart, soft skills drive hard dollars. So it's going right to the bottom line. And so we're back to that first hot topic or trend that I noted, and that is a culture now equals ROI. All right, so those are the top 4 hot topics and trends. Let me talk about a 5th one, and this one, work with me here. This one is important also. Belonging at work is important, and we're seeing belonging enter into more and more and more conversations about work culture and about work as we continue to redefine work to be more holistic. And I'll talk about that more in just a moment in my 6th one. Belonging at work is important. Specifically, we've seen DEI become more and more of a conversation, and I had some great conversations about DEI with lots of my guests over this first season in the Work Positive podcast. However, now we're hearing DEI and B, and the B is for belonging. I'll give you another B word in just a minute in my 6th trend. B is for belonging. Now, why is that so important? Again, during the pandemic, there was the loneliness, and we recognized that social needs are met at work also. In fact, the average person spends 70% of their waking hours working. if they're still engaged in the workforce, 70% of the waking hours. So if you figure 8 hours to sleep and 70%, right, of 16 hours, that's a lot of time, right? You're spending more time with people with whom you work than you are with your own family or the people that you live with. So that's an incredible number. Now, the key to this belonging at work, and if you've listened to more than a few of these podcast episodes over the last year, you've heard me talk about this. The key to belonging at work is what I like to refer to as an equity of exchange. That is, the baseline would be my daily task, what it is I do as a part of my work. Now, connecting, since I'm given 70% of my waking hours to these tasks, the equity of exchange then becomes I'm exchanging that amount of time. Sure, I'm being paid for it, but time I can't make any more of. Money I can always find a way to make more of. I'm exchanging that amount of time, energy, resources for work with this company. So what I need is to understand how my daily task, the things that I'm working on for the company each and every day, connect with the company purpose. So it's almost like my personal purpose and my understanding of the company purpose need to align. And once they align and I can see my piece, my part of fulfilling the company's purpose and creating a sustainable company, preferably a purpose that is greater than myself, a noble cause, some people would call it. Certainly, there's lots of ways of thinking about that, but I'm exchanging time, energy, and attention in my work. And in exchange for doing that, I want some equity. I want to see my place in the company purpose and how the company's fulfilling that. And once I make that connection, then I belong because I can see my place in the overall, not just structure, but the overall purpose of the company. So don't think that belonging can be captured just by an org chart. No. In fact, as David Freeman talked about, go back and listen to that episode. He and I had an amazing conversation about, he has 8 steps to culture by design. That's his book, Culture by Design, an amazing book. One of the books that's included in the Small Hinges Swing Big Doors course that we've launched, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But that equity of exchange, that belonging is of vital importance because once that happens, it's reinforced by the culture and it must be a part, as David talks about, of the onboarding process. And then it must enter into the reinforcement of that behavior of ensuring my daily tasks are connected to the company purpose. It's got to be reinforced on a daily basis, if at least weekly, right? And so management then and leadership has the wonderful opportunity to ensure that I am reinforced in understanding that connection between my daily task and the company purpose. And therein, belonging is created and motivation, productivity, engagement, those kinds of things are just accelerated. Again, what we're talking about is putting the human back in human resources. So I guess that's kind of the overall theme for season 1, right? We're putting the human back in human resources. And so as you give leadership in your particular company and creating a positive work culture, how can you ensure that belonging is an important part of the journey of everybody who's working there? Okay, so that's the 5th important hot topic or hot trend that I noticed from this year. So quickly, let me move on to the final one. Becoming at work is vital. Now, what does that mean? Well, it's DEI squared now, right? Belonging and becoming. Dr. Bob Johansen talks about belonging and becoming and the importance of both of those. Here's the way I want you to think about becoming at work. Previously, we've talked so much about professional development, PD, right? Now we want to talk about PPD, professional and personal development. Again, we're reuniting humanity rather than creating two dynamics. We're recognizing, as I wrote about in one of my blogs recently, that a positive work culture starts at home. It begins at home, right? Because it's a person, and whatever happens to the person personally, individually, also affects the professional. And we've known that cognitively, but really getting emotively excited about that and behind that has been lagging. It's been running behind. So what we've seen over the past year, and this is the sixth hot topic, is this is a trend to begin understanding that becoming is vitally important. So what does becoming look like? Well, it can be, remember the equity of exchange between my daily task, right, and the company purpose. It can be clarity of understanding, not necessarily certainty, but clarity of understanding that there is a career path for me. And that's the way we typically have talked about it, traditionally talked about it. If you want to think about it as more personal and professional development, I think that suits what we're trying to say here better because it speaks to the humanity of the person who's working. So think of this as personal and professional development. I am becoming, not just moving up the ladder on an org chart, not just assuming more and more responsibility, not just being paid more and more and more, but I'm exploring parts of who I am and perhaps latent superpowers that have yet to come to the forefront, right? Opportunities that I want to embrace just to learn something that may be outside of my primary task area and just to see how I can dip my toe in that pool, see what the temperature is like and see if I want to wade in further and perhaps even, go full in and just dive right on in. That's an important part of what we've observed over the last year. So it's belonging, yes, but also becoming. So DEI squared, belonging and becoming. And becoming is vitally important. So think about the importance in your own work culture of professional development. How is that also personal development? And how can you embrace this notion of personal, professional development being one, and the importance of becoming, particularly for the younger generations who are at work now? So those are the 6 hot topics, 6 hot trends that I noticed from season 1. Again, find a way to comment, send me an email at drjoey@workpositive.today. We can have a conversation about this. If you're on YouTube, make a comment about it. If you're on our website at workpositive.today, watching this video, there's a place for you to comment down there. Please go in and do that. Now, I promised you, and I'll do this quickly, I promised you a couple of 3 times now to tell you about something that has really been a product of season 1 and all these amazing guests. And that is the creation of the Small Hinges Swing Big Doors course. It's all virtual. I have 44 videos there. My course creator partners are Dr. Bob Johansson, with whom I talk about mindset and the importance of future-back thinking, thinking out 10 years and then coming back and choosing your next best steps. Joe Sacchetti is also one of my guests. We have 5 videos that Joe and I recorded. He was one of my guests on the Work Positive podcast over the last year. And he's a former Army Ranger and a leader there, has been in the sales industry as a leader for the past 20 years. That particular module is all about relationships with your team members and how to create the best relationships possible. And of course, that's been a part of all 6 of these trends I've just talked about, but also how to give leadership to those in productive ways that really bring out the best in people and help them relate with customers or clients, vendors, and suppliers well. Third conversation is with Mitchell Levy. Go back and listen to his episode. He is the founder, the leader of Credibility Nation. And so here we're talking about emotional engagement. Go back and listen to that episode with Mitchell and you'll discover what he and I talk about around what I like to call the Believe Core Practice set of habits in this Small Hinges Swing Big Doors course. Fourth one is David Friedman. Mentioned him a moment ago in his book, Culture by Design. 8 steps for how you can create a positive work culture. We walk you through each of those 8 steps. And then the 5th and final course creator with me is my good friend, Jim Palmer, whom I've known for a number of years now. Jim is all about service, whether it's serving his team members or his customers or clients. And so Serve First is his book. And, he and I talked about that on his episode of the Work Positive podcast. So be sure and go back and listen to that. By the way, all the books that I've mentioned here briefly from my 5 co-creators, they're in a box of books that are delivered right to your front door when you invest in the Small Hinges Swing Big Doors course. Learn more about it. Go to workpositive.today/small hinges. There you can read all about it. And you can discover the amazing, phenomenal gifts that we've put together in ways we can serve you as you seek to create your own positive work culture. So that's the recap on season 1. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode. Hey, season 2 starts next week. It's right around the corner, or however you set these up to deliver in your podcast player, it's the next one up. So keep listening, keep leaning in, and let's keep learning together in yet another amazing season of the Work Positive Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Work Positive Podcast. Please share this podcast with your friends who are HR and small business leaders so they can do one thing today to create a positive work culture that increases productivity and profits. I'd like to give you a free Work Positive course just for listening. It's called Something to Talk About, and it's transformed the work conversations of so many people all over the world. Get your free copy when you go to workpositive.today/something to talk about, and you can start transforming your conversations today. Remember, it pays to work positive.